Have you ever seen someone so confident, so certain they were the smartest person in the room until, within seconds, everything flipped? What if I told you that moment happened live on the BBC, in front of millions, when a British reporter tried to mock a Filipino guest and ended up being the one who got schooled instead? It was supposed to be an ordinary segment on Global Voices, a popular BBC morning program that featured people from around the world speaking about language and culture. The anchor that day, Edward Hale, was known for his sharp wit and posh accent, the kind of voice that carried authority without effort. He believed that Queen's English was not just a way of speaking, but a sign of sophistication. The guest, on the other hand, was someone few in the UK had ever heard of, a Filipino language teacher named Maria de Guzman. She wasn't there to talk politics or world news. She was invited for a light discussion about how English sounds around the world. It was meant to be fun, even humorous. But what happened next, no one expected. When the cameras turned on, Edward smiled the way anchors do perfectly, professionally. "Joining us now from Manila," he said, "is Maria de Guzman, an English teacher from the Philippines." "Maria, good morning," Maria smiled back, calm and composed. Her tone was gentle, her accent distinct yet clear. "Good morning, Edward. It's a pleasure to be here." Edward chuckled softly, the kind of laugh that wasn't quite friendly. "I must say, Maria, your English is quite impressive. Do most Filipinos speak English like you?" There was a subtle undertone, something that made the crew exchange glances. Maria caught it too. It wasn't a compliment. It was a test. She smiled anyway. "Well," she said, "English is one of our official languages, so yes, it's quite common. We learn it from a young age." Edward nodded, leaning slightly forward. "Ah, yes. But would you say it's proper English?" That word proper hung in the air like smoke. Maria paused. "Proper?" she repeated, her eyes narrowing slightly. "I suppose that depends on whose definition we're using." There was a beat of silence, just long enough for the audience to feel the shift. Then she continued, her tone soft but steady. "If by proper, you mean the kind that people can understand, express emotion with, and connect through, then yes, it's quite proper." Edward smiled tightly, unamused. "I meant grammatically proper," he clarified. "You know, like British English." This was the moment. The invisible line between polite conversation and condescension had been crossed. Maria could have ignored it. She could have laughed it off, or agreed politely. But instead, she chose something else, something powerful. She said, "Do you know what's interesting, Edward? When I teach English to my students, I always remind them, language doesn't measure intelligence, it measures connection. And connection isn't limited to one accent." The control room went silent. Even Edward blinked, unsure how to respond. It wasn't anger in her voice. It was grace, sharp, undeniable grace. He tried to recover. Of course, he said quickly. "But surely, the British standard is still the most, how shall we say, authentic." Maria smiled again. "Authentic," she echoed. "Let me tell you something. When Filipinos speak English, they're often speaking to survive, to work abroad, to care for families, to be understood in a world that rarely listens. That's not imitation, Edward. That's adaptation. That's authenticity at its most human." For a second, the proud BBC anchor had nothing to say. He simply nodded, looking down at his notes. The camera caught the faint tremor in his hand as he shuffled the papers. The viewers at home saw it too. Social media lit up within minutes. Clips of Maria's calm but piercing words spread across platforms, with captions like, "Filipina teacher teaches BBC a lesson," and "The woman who redefined English live on air." But behind that viral moment, there was a deeper story, one that began long before that morning. Because Maria didn't come from privilege or global recognition. She came from a small town in Batangas, raised by a mother who sold fish at the market and a father who worked overseas. Her English came not from elite schools, but from worn-out books and endless curiosity. As a child, she used to listen to old BBC radio broadcasts through a rusty transistor radio. She admired the crisp, rolling sound of British voices. She mimicked them for fun, sometimes for escape. But as she grew older, she realized something. The world often equated good English with good worth, and she refused to accept that. So when she spoke that morning, it wasn't just a defense of Filipino English. It was a lifetime's worth of quiet resistance. She later said in an interview, "It wasn't about winning an argument. It was about standing up for every Filipino who's been laughed at for saying comfort room instead of restroom, or open the light instead of turn on the light. Our words may sound different, but they carry the same heart." That day, the BBC segment ended awkwardly. Edward thanked her quickly, smiled stiffly, and moved on to the next story. But the damage, or rather, the awakening, was already done. Across the UK, people began discussing why proper English still held so much power and whether that idea needed to change. And in the Philippines, something stirred. Teachers shared the clip in classrooms. Parents replayed it at dinner. Strangers online wrote, "She spoke for all of us. But here's what most people didn't know. Maria's story didn't end there." Because that interview didn't just challenge one man. It began to challenge an entire system that had looked down on her people for decades. And in the weeks that followed, something remarkable happened, something that even Maria herself never saw coming. When the broadcast ended that morning, the air in the BBC studio felt thick, as if the room itself knew something irreversible had just happened. Edward Hale's smile never fully returned, and his co-hosts avoided meeting his eyes. They all knew this wasn't one of those light-hearted Global Voices segments that faded into the archives. Something had shifted, something global. By noon, clips from the interview had flooded social media. On TikTok, a 30-second snippet of Maria saying, "Language doesn't measure intelligence, it measures connection," had already hit 1 million views. Twitter, or X, as it was now called, was on fire. Some users mocked Edward's arrogance, while others called Maria a queen of composure. BBC's own YouTube channel received tens of thousands of comments within hours, mostly from Filipinos living abroad. Finally, someone said it. She spoke for every OFW who was told their accent is funny. This is what elegance looks like. No shouting, no anger, just truth. Meanwhile, in a small cafe in Batangas, Maria sat quietly, her phone buzzing uncontrollably. Her students had seen it. Her friends had seen it. Even her former colleagues from the international school in Dubai had sent messages. She smiled, a little overwhelmed. Fame had never been her goal. In fact, she had hesitated to even join the BBC segment. She wasn't used to cameras. She preferred chalkboards and books to bright lights and microphones. But now, her voice had traveled farther than she ever imagined. What most people didn't know, though, was what had happened in the hours right after that interview ended. After the cameras stopped rolling, Edward had taken off his earpiece and muttered something under his breath. He wasn't angry, just unsettled. For the first time in years, someone had called him out, not with outrage, but with wisdom. He didn't like how it made him feel small. His producer, a woman named Charlotte, approached him quietly. "You were a bit harsh," she said softly. He shrugged. "I was just being factual. Were you?" she asked, looking at him meaningfully. Because she didn't sound wrong to me, he didn't answer. That night, at his London apartment, Edward rewatched the clip. Once, twice, 3 times. He zoomed in on her face, trying to see if there was any hint of malice in her calm expression. There wasn't. Just conviction. He hated to admit it, but she had carried herself with a grace he rarely saw, even among politicians and celebrities. He began to research her school, her talks, her background. He discovered that Maria had been teaching English for over 20 years, helping call center agents, nurses, and seafarers prepare for work abroad. She wasn't just fluent, she was a bridge. Her students had built lives because of what she taught them. He closed his laptop, feeling a strange mix of embarrassment and admiration. Meanwhile, in the Philippines, news outlets picked up the story. Headlines read, "BBC host mocked Filipina teacher, guess who taught him a lesson? Filipino pride. Teacher from Batangas becomes internet sensation." Maria's school organized a small celebration. Her students brought flowers, and even the mayor sent a letter thanking her for defending the dignity of the Filipino tongue. But amid the applause, Maria stayed humble. "It's not about me," she told them. "It's about reminding the world that our voice matters." Still, something about that phrase, "our voice matters," lingered. In the following days, journalists requested interviews. Universities asked her to speak. A language institute in London even invited her to give a lecture about the global identity of English. It was surreal. The woman who once practiced pronunciation by listening to old BBC radio now had the BBC asking for her insight. She agreed, but under one condition: no debates, no sensationalism. "If we're going to talk," she said firmly, "we talk about respect." Edward saw the invitation too. His producer hesitated to tell him, but when she did, he surprised everyone. He asked to attend. "I think I need to hear her speak again," he said. On the day of the lecture, the hall in London was packed. Filipino nurses, British teachers, and foreign students filled the seats. The atmosphere was electric. Maria stepped up to the podium, her voice steady, her posture confident yet warm. She began not with a definition, but a story. "When I was 8, she said, "I used to repeat BBC newscasts into a broken tape recorder. I thought if I could sound like those voices, I'd be respected. But one day, my father told me something that changed everything. He said, 'Anak, the world doesn't need you to sound British. It needs you to sound like you.'" A murmur rippled through the crowd. Edward, sitting in the back row, felt a chill. He remembered correcting foreign guests before, interrupting them mid-sentence to clarify their words. He thought he was being professional, but now it felt different, like he had been blind to something deeper. Maria continued. "The English language didn't make the British great. The British made English human, and now the world keeps it alive, not through imitation, but through adaptation. Every Filipino, Indian, Nigerian, or Chinese who speaks English, they're not diluting it, they're expanding it." Applause filled the hall, but it wasn't loud or wild, it was steady, thoughtful, like the kind that follows truth. Edward found himself clapping, too. For once, not out of politeness, but out of genuine respect. After the lecture, he approached her quietly. "Maria," he said, extending his hand, "you've given me something I didn't know I was missing." She looked at him kindly. "Understanding?" He smiled faintly. "Perspective." That moment wasn't televised, but it mattered more than any broadcast. Because what began as mockery on live TV had turned into a conversation about dignity, identity, and language, the things that make us human. Yet, as Maria returned to Manila, a new wave of attention began to grow. And with it came voices, some supportive, others skeptical. Not everyone was happy about what she had said. Some called her too bold. Others questioned why a Filipina dared to redefine English for the British. But Maria didn't back down. She knew this wasn't just about grammar. It was about history and who gets to write it. And so, as the world continued to debate, she prepared for what would become the most powerful confrontation, yet the one that would finally reveal who truly owns the language we all speak. By the third week after the BBC interview, Maria's name had become a symbol. Her face appeared in newspapers from Manila to London, always paired with the same line, Language doesn't measure intelligence, it measures connection. It was being quoted in classrooms, churches, and even parliaments. But the more her message spread, the more resistance she faced. British tabloids began running articles with headlines like, "The teacher who wants to rewrite English." Some commentators accused her of cultural arrogance. Others called her speech a sentimental overreaction to linguistic hierarchy. On talk shows, her clip was dissected like a political scandal. To many Westerners, she was the unexpected voice from the tropics, too articulate, too confident, too inconvenient. Maria watched quietly from her modest home in Batangas. The wind outside carried the smell of salt and earth. Her students came and went, laughing, asking her if she'd seen the memes about her. She smiled for them. But deep down, she was tired. The world was turning her into a symbol of defiance when all she'd wanted was to speak the truth. One afternoon, her phone rang. It was Charlotte, the BBC producer. "Maria," she said gently, "I know things have been intense, but Edward would like to invite you back this time for a live discussion. It's not a debate, I promise. He wants to make things right." Maria hesitated. The memory of that first interview was still fresh, and she didn't want to be used for ratings. "What kind of discussion?" she asked. Charlotte's tone was sincere. "He wants to talk about how English has evolved and how media, our media, might be part of the problem. He wants your perspective again." Off script. It took Maria a long silence to decide. "All right," she said finally. "But I'll only do it if we talk as equals." When she arrived in London, the BBC studio felt different. Less polished, more human. The light seemed softer, the producers warmer. Even Edward's voice had changed. It carried something new, something quieter. "Welcome back, Maria," he began. "Last time, I may have misunderstood the heart of your message. I hope today we can listen better." Maria smiled. "Listening is the beginning of respect," she said. The segment began simply enough. Edward asked her how she viewed English as a global language. She replied with her usual poise. "English was never owned," she said. "It was shared by history, by circumstance, by necessity. What makes it beautiful is that it belongs to everyone who dares to speak it." He nodded. "And do you think that sometimes we, the British, hold on to it too tightly?" She paused, thoughtful. "I think you hold on to it with pride. Pride isn't wrong, but when pride becomes gatekeeping, it stops being culture and starts being control." The audience was silent. The words were firm, but there was no bitterness in them. Then Edward leaned in, his voice low. "Maria, I want to ask you something personal. When I first spoke to you, did you feel disrespected?" She looked at him for a long moment. "I did," she said softly, "but not because of you alone. I felt disrespected by a system that taught people like me that our English, our way of expressing ourselves, was inferior. I felt the weight of generations who apologized for speaking differently." Her eyes glistened slightly, not from sadness but from memory. "When I was a child, my teacher used to slap my wrist if I mispronounced a word. I remember thinking, maybe I'll never sound right. But years later, I realized I didn't need to sound right. I needed to sound real." The audience erupted in applause. Edward sat there, eyes lowered. "I wish I'd heard that when I was younger," he said quietly. "I grew up thinking only one kind of English mattered. It's strange sometimes we become prisoners of our own language." Maria smiled gently. "And yet, language was meant to free us." Something in that exchange broke through the invisible wall between them. For the first time, they weren't broadcaster and guest, they were equals, sharing the same truth from different sides of history. The segment continued. They spoke about the Filipino diaspora, about how millions of Filipinos worked in countries where they had to switch tongues daily, Tagalog at home, English at work, another language abroad, Maria said. "We are multilingual by survival, not by luxury. Our fluency comes from need, not privilege." She paused, her voice steady. "That's why, when you mock a Filipino accent, you're not mocking poor English. You're mocking resilience. You're mocking a mother in Dubai teaching her son homework after a 12-hour shift. You're mocking a seafarer who learns nautical terms in English to navigate storms. You're mocking a generation who learned to dream in a borrowed language." The studio was silent again, no coughs, no whispers. Even the cameraman blinked slower, as if afraid to break the moment. Edward swallowed hard. "I owe you an apology," he said, "not just for the interview, but for not realizing how deep this goes." Maria nodded slowly. Apologies are powerful when they're followed by change. That evening, as the segment aired live, social media once again exploded, but this time with unity. Filipinos, Britons, Indians, Nigerians, all sharing the same clip with the same message: "Language belongs to those who use it." A British professor tweeted, "This Filipina teacher just gave one of the most profound lessons on identity I've ever heard." A Filipino overseas worker wrote, "For the first time, I don't feel ashamed of how I speak." And somewhere, deep in the heart of London, Edward Hale sat quietly after the cameras stopped rolling. He reached for his phone and typed one sentence on his public profile. "English is no longer ours, it never was. It's the world's." It went viral, instantly. But while the world celebrated the moment, Maria knew this wasn't an ending, because beyond the applause, there was a deeper calling rising inside her, a conviction that what happened wasn't just about English, but about dignity itself. And that conviction would soon take her somewhere no one expected back home, to where it all began, where she would deliver the message that would define her legacy forever. When Maria returned to the Philippines, the airport felt different. It wasn't just the humid air or the familiar scent of roasted corn and diesel from the nearby road. It was the way people looked at her with quiet pride, as if she had done something they had longed to do for decades. Speak back, but with grace. There were banners at the arrival gate. "Welcome home, Ma'am Maria." Students from her school were waiting, holding hand-drawn signs with her quote, "Language doesn't measure intelligence, it measures connection." But Maria wasn't there for applause. She had already made peace with fame. What she wanted now was something more lasting change. A few weeks later, she received an invitation from the Department of Education. They wanted her to deliver a national address at the opening of a new program celebrating multilingualism in Filipino schools. The event would be broadcast nationwide. It wasn't just an honor, it was a moment of reckoning. For years, Filipino students had been taught to chase perfect English, to hide their accents, to measure their worth in pronunciation. Now, for the first time, someone was asking, what if our way of speaking is already enough? Maria spent nights preparing her speech. She wrote and rewrote every line, not to impress, but to heal. On the day of the event, the Grand Hall in Manila was packed. Teachers, students, politicians, ambassadors. Edward Hale, too, was there, having flown from London quietly, without media fanfare. He wanted to listen one last time. As Maria stepped to the podium, the hall fell silent. Cameras flashed, but she didn't look at them. She looked at the faces in front of her, the teachers with tired eyes, the students in crisp uniforms, the parents sitting proudly in the back rows. Her voice, when she began, was calm but filled with something deep, something older than language itself. "When I first learned English," she said, "I thought fluency meant freedom. I thought if I spoke perfectly, I could go anywhere, be anyone. But I was wrong. Fluency without identity is just imitation. True freedom is when you speak and still sound like home." A murmur of emotion spread through the room. She continued, "For generations, we've been told that to succeed, we must sound like someone else. But every time a Filipino speaks English, something remarkable happens. We don't lose ourselves, we expand the language. We give it warmth. We make it human. We make it Filipino." She paused, letting the words breathe. "Our accent is not a mistake. It is the echo of our islands, the sound of history meeting hope. When you hear it, don't correct it, understand it, because behind every syllable is a story of struggle, faith, and love. In the front row, Edward felt something stir inside him. He had interviewed presidents and poets, but he had never heard words this alive. He watched as the crowd leaned forward, not wanting to miss a single word. Maria's tone softened. I once thought language belonged to those who invented it. Now I know it belongs to those who live it. To the mother in Cebu teaching her child to read both English and Bisaya. To the nurse in London speaking softly to an elderly patient who doesn't understand her accent but feels her care. To the seafarer who prays in Tagalog but gives orders in English while crossing the Pacific. They are the true authors of global English. The room was utterly still. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. And to the young ones, she said, her eyes glistening, never be ashamed of how you speak. Your voice is your fingerprint. No one in the world sounds exactly like you, and that is your power. At that, something extraordinary happened. The audience stood not with thunderous applause, but with reverent silence. Teachers wiped tears discreetly. Students whispered to each other, "She's right." And somewhere in that sea of faces, Edward Hale stood as well, clapping slowly, eyes shining. After the speech, he approached her once again. "You've changed how I hear the world," he said quietly. "Not just how I speak," Maria smiled. "That's how change begins, not in sound, but in listening." Later that night, Maria stood alone on the rooftop of her home, looking out over the flickering lights of Batangas. The wind carried distant laughter and the hum of tricycles below. She thought about how a single conversation, one that started as mockery, had grown into a movement. She wasn't a celebrity or an activist. She was a teacher who believed in the dignity of voices, in the power of humility over pride. From that moment on, the Philippines began to reimagine English not as a borrowed crown, but as a shared torch. Schools started promoting cultural English, embracing accent diversity. Media outlets featured Filipino English speakers as anchors, not guests. And across the world, Filipinos spoke with newfound confidence, not to prove they were fluent, but to remind the world they had always been heard. Years later, when Maria retired, she received a letter. It was from Edward. Inside was a simple note, written in his precise, careful handwriting. "Dear Maria, you once said English measures connection. You were right. Because of you, I now teach my students that the world doesn't need one accent, it needs one heart. Thank you for teaching me how to listen." Maria smiled, folded the letter neatly, and placed it inside her old English grammar book, the same one she had used as a child. On the first page, she wrote a single sentence in her own handwriting. To speak English the Filipino way is to speak it with soul. Not. And somewhere, between the islands and the ocean, that voice continued to echo.